Hey listeners, welcome to Straight Wife Trans Life. I'm Lisa. It's Father's Day in the US today. Happy Father's Day. And the first Father's Day post-disclosure was really rough because we have a school-aged son and we tried to make it special back in the days of having a husband. So commercials were tough. Scrolling through social media posts was a tearjerker. But now, 2.5 years in, it's not a big deal, and I've had time to adapt and accept. And this year, Macy's actually sent an email that said, "We understand Father's Day can be triggering for some people. Please click here if you do not want to see Father's Day advertisements." Good for you, Macy's. And yes, I did click that button. So Father's Day is under control. We created another Mother's Day that works for us to celebrate my spouse. But I still struggle with how to label my spouse when she's not around, like when I'm alone. Is labeling my transgender spouse just spouse enough, or is it necessary to add more or less? Here's how I'm currently working through this particular struggle. When my spouse and I are together without our son, it feels like people see us as a couple versus friends. I'll give an example. So we went to a comedy club recently, and there was a nice couple at the same table who we chatted with and who, without knowing us, asked questions that you might ask a couple, like, do you two live in the city, or do you two enjoy, whatever the question was. So this comedy club is in San Francisco, so it is pretty typical to assume that maybe we are a couple. And the fact is that a lot of our stories involve our life together, so that's also a big giveaway. And we no longer wear our wedding rings, but when our sentences begin with we, the history is obvious. That doesn't bother me. I don't feel like I need to explain anything, and most conversations when we are out together like that carry on in a normal fashion. However, when we are apart and I'm with our son or alone, most people assume that I have a husband. And I admit, when my spouse is not around, I actually struggle with how to address our situation still. Even together, I will just introduce her by her first name, or with our son, I introduce her as my son's other parent. But alone, there's a whole calculation in my head involved. So let me give you another example of how that works. It's summer and our son is in swim classes 4 days a week. My spouse took him one day last week, and the next day a woman I see there asked me if I was going to do a makeup day for missing one day. And I just said, "Oh, he was actually here, but someone else took him." And I said that because I didn't want to get into my situation, and I still feel like I'm not being my authentic self if I use the word wife. And I didn't want to say spouse because maybe later she would remember that she saw my spouse, and then maybe she'd bring it up the next time, or I would make it weird by being even more awkward because now I felt like she thinks I'm something that I'm not. So that is some serious overthinking, and that is this little computer in my head that now makes these calculations when I meet people as to how much do I say, how little do I say, is it important, does it matter? And I struggle with finding balance between I don't care what people think, I'm fine with how our family is doing, versus trying to be this authentic version of myself where I can leave it at spouse and not say something like, yeah, that's my spouse, but I'm straight. I also recently said, I'm not sure how to properly address her, but my spouse came out as transgender and she's at home right now with our son. And that was after I did my little calculation in my head about, well, how much should I share? Is this someone that we might spend time with together, outside of the situation? And like I mentioned, this only happens when I'm alone. So when my son is with me, I have no problem. And I'm not a psychologist, but it does feel like this mental struggle that I'm working through comes down to something called cognitive dissonance. And I'm going to read what that means verbatim. Cognitive dissonance is basically this phenomenon whereby we have a natural drive for consistency in that our belief system must be consistent with itself and it must be consistent with our actions. So on the one hand, I'm happy that my spouse and I have found a way to make her transition work for us as a family, but explaining it to others in a way that still feels true to me is an issue. And I feel guilty and bad that I can't just say my wife. I can't. So for now, I coexist with the guilt that I feel when someone says, "Oh, your husband," and then I feel like I have to go into my internal calculator of how to respond. Will this person ever meet her? Then I should explain that this is my spouse and that she's no longer a male. And then if it's not somebody that I know, I just say, "Yeah, my husband, blah, blah, blah." And I know that I don't really have to do that, but it is just something that I do. I acknowledge that it's an issue and that it's something that I have to work with. Ultimately, for those of us who are spouses or partners to a transgender person, we do just have to acknowledge that ups and downs are part of the journey, whether we are new to the transition or maybe we're a few years in or even more. Some things you have to continue working on, and some things you just have to be like, yeah, so I have an internal calculator. Maybe that's just how it's going to be. We just have to be kind to ourselves if we have these moments of struggles, and we just have to be able to communicate with our partner. And I did ask my spouse how she feels regarding this issue that I have with labeling her when we're not together. I'm going to leave you with what she said. So until next time, here are her thoughts.
In 20 years, I will not care, honestly, how you call me. I'm just so happy to be with you and to spend my time with you and to have you in my life, like the most important person, and you also being there for me and allowing me to be there for you.